Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sanford Stem Cell Institute Regen podcast here at UC San Diego. I'm Bobby Gordon, your host. Today, we are lucky enough to have Ken Savin from Redwire here with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bobby.
I really appreciate you taking time. So you're visiting San Diego.
I'm visiting San Diego, but I'm from San Diego, so it's good to be back for a little bit.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're currently at Redwire. You're chief scientist there. You have over 20-year career in the industry. How did you get there, and what does a chief scientist do at Redwire?
Those are great questions. Actually, so I never intended to be where I'm at. Maybe that's how careers are these days. But I started off right out of my postdoc going to work for a pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis and was there for a great 20-year career. Really enjoyed it. Moved from there after, being close to retirement. It was time to kind of move on. And I left. I was going to go out on my own, but I got hired by a group called CASIS, the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space. They are the people who operate the International Space Station U.S. National Lab.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was there for 5 years, and after 5 years, I got a call from a little company in southern Indiana called TechShot, actually, asking if I would become their chief scientist. And after a little finagling back and forth, I accepted the offer. And by the time I showed up for work on my first day, they had been acquired by Redwire. And
Wow.
that is who I'm employed by now.
Okay. So just kind of the puzzle pieces fell into place haphazardly, and here you are with Redwire.
Here I am. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So what does a chief scientist do?
So a chief scientist, well, first of all, I work for an aerospace company. So
Yeah.
a chief scientist is, it's not ultimately the focus of the company. We build navigation systems and solar cells for large structures in space. But the science side is becoming a bigger and bigger piece. People are starting to think about, hey, what are we going to make in space? And in a lot of ways, I act as the chief product officer for part of Redwire. So they'll come to me and say, hey, what should we be making in space? Why should we make it? How is it commercially significant? And how do we make it work? So that is what I spend a lot of my time doing, is thinking about things like that.
Well, that makes sense. Do you have to think about return on investment and costs? I mean, to do research in space is really expensive.
Absolutely. So Redwire is a publicly traded company. And so we have shareholders, and they're expecting us to make money. So it has to be a consideration. And I think that you're seeing a shift within the industry, in some ways actually pushed upon us by NASA, to start to think about things in a more commercially savvy way. So that's what we're doing. And all the projects that I have to come up with there, we have to talk about the finances. How much will it cost? How will we make money? How long will it take? Who's going to benefit? Why do we want to make the investment? That is a constant question that is brought up and part of the conversation about new projects.
That makes sense. So then what is it like to bring a partner in like UC San Diego, Sanford Stem Cell Institute, for example, or any other research hub, university-based hub, those types of things that are not necessarily commercial, to work with an organization like Redwire on projects? What is that like? What's that dynamic, and what might be the opportunities be that you wouldn't have with other commercial partners, for example?
So at first glance, you may look at it and say, oh, well, it's very academic. You're going to be doing something that's academic. How are you going to make money doing that? But the reality is, when you bring in even a purely undergraduate institute, you are bringing in experts in their field. You're bringing in the best in the world to do that type of work. And you bring in enthusiastic people who it's part of their research. It's what they want to do, what they've invested their lives in. It's what they're teaching their students and what their students are looking at as prospective careers. It is a really powerful way to take big steps forward in particular fields and to be at the forefront of science. I would love to do work again and again with major U.S. corporations, right? That's another way to do it. But there's a price to pay for that as well. And I think there's a great balance working with some of the best in the world and coming to a place like UCSD. And this is where you're going to find it.
Well, I appreciate that. I like to explain to folks about what I do in supporting the Institute. I like to say we're kind of the neutral ground, right? We're not commercial, but we're not, I mean, we are very academically based, but we also provide a really unique opportunity for an organization like yours to help, especially with the privatization of space. So tell me about privatization of space and where you see that going.
Yeah. So privatization, I look at it more, the real impactful part is being the democratization of space. So what you're starting to see is it's not just NASA anymore, right? That was when I grew up. It was always about NASA, and there were other people in a special place or special places, and I would never be one of those people. And now what you're finding is that everyday Americans are participating in this effort in different ways, whether it's a small company in Greenville, Indiana, that I work out of, that's got bought by a bigger company in Jacksonville, or working at a small university or a big university. It's starting to take advantage of the power that the American people can bring forward. And going back to talking about like why you work at a university and why that's important, UCSD, especially when we're talking about some of the things that are the breakthroughs happening in stem cell research and medical research, they're doing things that will benefit the American people. And so that has value, right? That has value on its own, but it also demonstrates that there's economic value, right? That there's something that people are willing to pay for that will set us apart and gives us a benefit that in many other countries, maybe most all other countries, you would never have. So I look at that as the opportunity of our age. It's really a fantastic time to be in space. You know, aside from all the things that SpaceX is doing and the fact that there's an International Space Station, you are starting to see that it's bringing the greatest minds of our society together to do fantastic things for humanity.
That's pretty amazing. We like to say, at least I like to say, we're very unique here at UC San Diego. We get to go from the bench, meaning the research bench, to lower Earth orbit back to the bedside, since we have a clinical trial alpha clinic here. So things have real world applications. But why are we doing research in space? Tell our listeners why space is so advantageous. Yeah, it costs a lot. So we get over that hump. Yeah, we love space. We've got the money. We made the case. But why? Why are we doing research in space with stem cells?
Well, first of all, I would say if you can do work without having to go to space, do it without going to space, because it is expensive, right? Just right now, to fly a kilo of something is going to cost you at least $25,000. That's just to fly it. That doesn't count all the time and effort and money it costs to prepare that payload and the cost of making it, whatever it is you're flying there, and then if you have to process it in space or back on Earth. So it's always an expensive choice. But people go to space for really one of three reasons. They either go because they want to take a look back down at the Earth. You get a perspective that you would not get in any other way unless you were way high up looking down. People sometimes will go to space because they want exposure to space, to outside, right? To the void, or they're going to another planet or the moon. They're exploring space. The third reason, and for the most part, the people that we work with are really trying to access microgravity, the microgravity environment. So the International Space Station is traveling in orbit very fast, sort of laterally. It's going in an orbit around the Earth. It's actually falling back down to the Earth, but it's going so fast sideways that it keeps missing. And what that does is it generates an environment where it's weightless. You feel like there is no gravity. There actually is a very, very, very small amount of gravity that you and I would not feel, but it allows us to do things you can do on Earth. Things don't fall. So if you grow cells in a petri dish on the Earth, they tend to be at the bottom and they kind of flatten out. But in space, they are spherical and they just hover there. Heat does not rise. So if you have a flame like a candle on the Earth, it looks invisible and it's blue and yellow and orange and red and the smoke rises off the top. In space, it's just a blue sphere and it will suffocate itself. It will eat all the air around it. And then there's a little CO2 bubble and it puts itself out.
That is fascinating.
So we can take advantage of that. We can do things in space that you could not do on the Earth. And that's why we do it.
thank you for that detailed explanation. And I think for a lot of folks, they don't realize how expensive it is to actually just take a keyload or a payload up into space. That's 25.
That's a 25 just for a payload. If you're
that.
taking a person up, it's even more.
Right? Because you got to have somebody to do the actual research.
And life support and all the other stuff, right? It's expensive. So
Yeah.
You really have to have a good reason to go up there. I would say for the most part, when we're looking at things like biomedical research, the real push is to learn. We're still at a learning phase, but we're on the cusp of doing things that will be beneficial to the American people. And ultimately, that's going to be a commercially significant product, I hope.
Have you been to space? Do you want to go to space?
I've not been to space. I did have the opportunity, though, earlier this year to be part of a parabolic mission. So that's one of those missions where you get on an airplane, it's a modified 727, you get up to cruising altitude, and then you set up your experiments and you're all good to go. And then the pilot dives for the Earth and everything rises up and spinning around. All your coworkers are spinning around in space and your little experiments are going. So we did that back in February. Very exciting, very interesting. I think I'm kind of done doing that. It was harder on my body than I thought it would be, but it was a great experience.
That's fair. I can't even imagine being up there for 6 months to a year to even longer.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tough. They're troopers.
Really tough. Yeah.
They're absolute troopers.
Yeah.
Let's go back to a little bit about some of the things that you're working on. So 3D Biofabrication Facility that you brought to the International Space Station through Redwire. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the Biofabrication Facility, we call it the BFF, is a printer. It's essentially a 3D plastic, kind of like a plastic printer, except it prints in cells and matrix, the material that is between the cells. And what it allows us to do is to print tissue in 3 dimensions. You can kind of stack cells on top of each other. On Earth, if you tried to do this, they would all just puddle out unless you added chemicals to hold them together or printed them into a prefab matrix. But in space, you can just pile stuff up. You build it up, you put it into a little incubator on station and let it kind of gel up. And after about 3 weeks, you can pull it out, bring it back down to Earth, and it will hold its shape.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it allows you to build tissues in 3 dimensions without the chemicals or the matrices. And we have printed cardiac tissue. We've printed a meniscus. That was one of our recent big projects.
Wow.
So it's at the early phase, and we're trying to understand kind of the scope and limitations of this type of approach. But the results have been very positive. We see how it works and where it doesn't, what we need to do to improve it. And I see in the future, long term, way out there, that there will be an opportunity where people can essentially order up tissue to replace their own tissue. And the beauty is we use their own stem cells. So it's their own genetic design, right? There's no rejection drugs, no any of that stuff. So I think long term, the biomedical side has the biggest opportunity as far as market scale. That is where it's going to happen. Health related solutions that are delivered to patients. That's where the real benefit will be. But we are a ways off. But it's working with schools like UCSD that are going to make this possible, right? We could not do this. They are leading the science. They are directing the science. We're in many ways enablers for that science, helping them achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Well, that's a great way to work together. It's a great way to think about it. Yeah. Absolutely. Very tangible, very real world examples that you gave there of what space can bring. And it's amazing that 3D printer, basically, as you talked about, the materials hold their shape when they come back to Earth.
Yeah, it's not just that they hold their shape. It's even that when you look at them under a microscope, the cells are spherical. And they tend to behave more like they do when they're inside a living organism, not when they're in a dish. So there are benefits. I think in some ways we are still figuring out how well they operate. Like, what is the relative ability for them to perform like they do in a animal or in a person versus what they're doing in space versus what are in vitro, in a test tube samples on the Earth generally operate at. And I think that's something we really have to understand. Many times what you find is you go and you do science in space or what have you, and you get a result, and you have to come back and kind of recenter yourself. What happened? Why did it happen? What's important about that? How do we have to change the experiment and do it again to really understand how it's performing relative to what we know to be true on Earth? In some ways, it's kind of a weird approach, maybe too philosophical, but you're almost looking at a whole new science, one that has not been thoroughly investigated, and we are only kind of at the beginning steps of taking advantage of.
That makes sense. And so it sounds to me like we have all these opportunities and we're still learning through the experiments and, trial and error, which is what we do on Earth anyway. We've been doing that for a long time. In my opinion, that's why I call it that we're practicing medicine. We're practicing, right? We're figuring it out. So what's next? What's on the horizon short term for space research, especially for stem cells, but long term?
So different areas of science are at different phases of development in doing research in space. And some of it reflects just how science is developing on Earth. Stem cell research, we look at it now as kind of a commonplace technology, but when it comes to actually developing and implementing stem cell therapies, we're just at the beginning, right? There's only a few out there, and but there's huge promise, right? Space is in the same way, kind of mirroring that, but it's even further behind. We're trying to figure out, okay, so we've done some stuff on the ground. What does it mean? And then how does it relate to what we see in space? Other areas of science, like chemistry, are much more developed. They may not have ultimately the same promise, but there's still a lot of benefit there, and there's a lot to learn from. For example, crystal production in space, growing crystals in space, is something that's been done. It was talked about in the original document that was published for potential for Skylab. That was back in 1973. They were talking about growing crystals in space for the pharmaceutical industry. Over the years, especially during shuttle and the early part of space station, they grew a lot of crystals in space. They were mostly protein crystals for understanding the structure of the protein targets that pharmaceutical companies or academics were going after, right? The key biological targets. And they want to understand their structure. And it all goes back to that whole concept of the lock and key principle, right? If you know what the lock looks like, then you're better able to design a key to work it. Okay. That has been done. There's a lot of background. People have seen it. They know there's a benefit. Crystals are generally larger. They are better formed. They're more perfect. And they're consistently the same size batch to batch in general, right? This has been seen over many examples. But that last point about the fact that crystals are generally the same size and shape from batch to batch, that's uniformity. And that has special meaning to people in the pharmaceutical industry, because when they go to make a big batch of some product, they want every crystal in that batch to be the same. They want it all to be uniform so that the first pill, the last pill, and every pill in between are all the same. And that is a tough thing to do.
Sure.
Oftentimes they have to do a mechanical grinding and other things just to get it to the right same size. So a question was asked, if you had a pharmaceutical agent that had a problem with that came when you formed crystals, they were different sizes, different shapes, or maybe even you had different crystal forms. That's also a possibility. Could you solve that by going to space? Turns out that a company did. Merck makes a product called Keytruda, which is an oncolytic monoclonal antibody. It's a very large seller for that company. And as it turns out, during manufacturing, it is a mixture of crystals. And they wondered, well, could we make a more uniform crystal in space? So they took Keytruda to space, they crystallized it in space, and they found that not only did they make a single crystal, but it was one they had never seen before.
Okay.
So they were able to bring that back, and using that knowledge and the conditions that it took to make it, they were able to reformulate. And I'm not sure what the direct connection is, but they are reformulating that product. I'm sure it was inspired in some way by the work they did in space. So right there is a right now example of something that will benefit people on Earth today. And I know it's more on the chemistry side, but we're on our way. We are on our way to doing things that will be impactful to people. And And I think that is just one of many examples. And you can see just from the broad swath of research that's being done in space, it's chemistry for pharmaceuticals, it's chemistry for chips, for computer processing materials, for fiber optic cable. It's biological studies associated with stem cell research, tissue generation, tissue production. It's the whole gamut of research. And I think that it is going to become a bigger and bigger part of science in a general sense. I think that one of the big challenges, and of course it's one we're talking about now, is what's happening with space station, it will have come to end of life, and what do we do at that point? But the fact that we're having to have those conversations, and we want to have them because they're important, it says something about where we've come as far as scientific research and what everybody thinks the real promise is for it.
Yeah, I would agree. We're at a very interesting precipice now with everything going private, but also with the space station being, decommissioned, I guess they say. I like to say retired.
Yeah. But there's a lot of plans for next generation stations that are going to be more commercially focused. There's another reason to be so focused on trying to do science that will have commercial value, because everybody's betting on it. That is, we're going. The next station will be one that does do research for NASA, and the American people, the American taxpayer, pays for that work to be done. But the expectation is they're only paying for part of it. That the rest of it is coming from commercial endeavor on station.
Absolutely, which makes sense, because that's part of the reason why it is commercial, because you have to pay for it somehow.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Makes perfect sense.
But I think we are, like you said, on the cusp of being at a point where that is a reality. It's not just a science fiction anymore. There are bits and pieces of it. And that's another reason to come to places like UCSD, where there are people who are thinking about the cutting edge research and trying to find solutions for real world problems.
Thank you for that. What can you tell us about your work with our Sanford Stem Cell Institute, Dr. Cat Jameson? What can you tell us about work that you're currently doing with us?
So Kat's research, I mean, there's breadth there.
Yeah.
It is frontline research associated, for the most part, with understanding cancer and ways to address it, ways to solve it. And one of the things that we've talked about actually recently is going after a target which Cat has and others have identified as being a critical sort of hub for cancer. That it's a pathway, a biological pathway that a lot of cancers use in their development. And she wants to understand that target and be able to stop it. And that it's a way that if you could, you're not just stopping a cancer, you could solve the problems associated with many cancers.
Right.
So that's the type of work we do. The beauty, again, of working with somebody like Kat is, she's a brilliant individual who is driven and understands the real problems. That's what we really look for. What are the problems that need to be solved that we can work through in space? But the other piece is that she brings the wherewithal. This is how you turn it into something, into a real therapy. This is the machinery the UCSD and her connections bring to make that happen. I think people either lose sight or don't fully understand how difficult some of these things are to actually execute.
Yeah.
And that when you find an individual who not only can do it, but has done it, it changes the way you operate. All of a sudden, she's the one calling the shots. There's no doubt. There was a conversation we had, and she just said, hey, you guys have to know your place. You're doing that part, I'm doing this part, right? And she's absolutely right? That is what we want. That is what we want. So those are the types of things that we do with Cat, and we're really grateful to be doing that work. We've already talked about next generation projects. We're applying for grant money to do those. And I know that NASA also pays attention to that. They pay attention to what we're doing. They pay attention to the projects that we are getting grant money for and operating, and they're paying attention to Cat Jameson, which is not the norm, but it's warranted in this case. And she's a powerhouse and has made things happen. So,
Indeed she is. Indeed she is. She's absolutely wonderful to work with. Very inspiring.
yes, absolutely.
Thanks for that insight.
Yeah.
She'll love to hear this. What gets you excited about the work that you do? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
So I think, okay, first of all, I again didn't expect to be doing this type of work, right? I was kind of ending my career in pharmacy, in the pharmaceutical industry, and doing pharma related things. And then I got this crazy call, right, from this person saying, hey, would you like to come and do work in space? And I had not really considered it as a serious option before. I really didn't know anything about it, to tell you the truth. I remember my sort of knee-jerk response was, yeah, sure, let's do a work on a space shuttle. And she said, we don't have space shuttles anymore. We have a space station. That's where you do your work. It's like, oh, well, I learned something, and she's actually serious. This person on the phone is actually serious about this. But what I do find out of all of it to be the most interesting is the fact that I'm doing work in space. It's a fantastic thing to be a part of, humanity's first real steps out into space. And at the same time, you get to work with the best researchers in the world, and you get to talk to them about their research. I mean, this is, it's a fantastic opportunity for a scientist to have. I think the last thing that I really do appreciate is, and part of this is the way I operate with my company and the way they treat me, is I get to come up with ideas working with these people and say, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And they say, okay, well, go do it. What's holding you back, right? That's the question is, what is it going to take to get it done? So
what a great environment to work in.
Oh, yeah, great environment. And it's a great time to be part of this part of American work, right?
Yeah.
Space work, which back in, I guess, in the 60s, early 70s was a huge deal, right? With Apollo and people are into it. I think it died out for a while. People kind of lost track of it.
Sure.
And now it's back and it's happening. And even with all that, I don't think people recognize that, SpaceX is probably launching 80, 90 rockets a year. That's like, one every couple of days is going up, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other piece of it that is kind of remarkable, for me at least, is the fact that it's not just Cat Jameson and her research, it's her students.
Yes.
Right? And it's, there are now young people, high school students, college students who are sending experiments up into space. Who would have ever guessed?
Right. And that leads me to my last question. Good segue. You must be psychic somehow. But what would you say to those students? What would you say to even younger kids that look at space and it's this anomalous thing? They're scared of math, but they might be interested in science. What would you say to them? How do you encourage the next generation?
That's actually a fantastic question, because that is everything, right? I'm towards the end, right? I'm going to be moving on, and there's talk of going back to the moon and then going to Mars.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm going to be watching that on TV, right? But these young people who are, born around the year 2000, there have been Americans in space since they've been alive.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, good point.
For the last 20 some odd years, there have been people in space, there have been Americans in space on the International Space Station. And I think it is something that is going to touch their lives in some way, if it hasn't already. I mean, there's a lot of everyday things that we interact with that were from space, right? In some way, right? Mylar for that thin reflective insulating material. The first laptop computer was made for a space shuttle mission. It's like things like that. So it's there, but now we're getting to the point where there's going to be real products, and there's a real chance that young people are going to be the ones that are going to space. It will be a much more normal thing. I think there's maybe, 300-400 people have been to space, but that number will double in the next 10 years. I'm sure of it. And you see that it's not just NASA anymore. It's private astronauts. So that's kind of the big picture view. And what I would say is, first of all, like they've been saying this for years, The job that you're going to get probably doesn't exist yet, right? With that whole thing. But I would go further and say that there are opportunities that we haven't even thought of. It's not just the jobs, it's the opportunities and the situations that they will find them in make it something that you have to be much more willing to step up and take a shot, right? And be adventurous because no one's ever done it before.
Yeah.
That is the promise of the future that they're going to inherit. And in many ways, I'm kind of jealous of it because I loved my career and I was the risk taker. You can talk to the people who know me from, working in the pharmaceutical industry. Beyond that, I was the guy who say, hey, let's take a shot at that. But the shots are getting bigger and they're even crazier just because of technologies and where we're at. It's a bright, beautiful new world for them.
But it was for you too. I mean, remember back at the beginning of the interview, you said, I never thought I'd be doing this, never even envisioned this. And when you were a kid, this job didn't exist. This industry didn't exist the way that it does. So if you think about it, the work that you've done as an innovator in this area has led to opening the door for that next generation to even innovate even further beyond ways that we even can conceive of today.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You got to be willing to take that shot. In some ways, I was blessed to have those opportunities and to have taken them when I did. Yeah.
Well, Ken, thank you for sharing your thoughts on everything biomedical and stem cell and space. I really appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, Ken Savin from Redwire.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.